I'm Morgan Reynolds, 37, financial advisor with a seemingly perfect life until last Tuesday. My sister Jessica and I were close growing up, sharing everything. That's why I thought nothing of telling her about the government securities in my home safe. Coming home from a business trip, I found the safe door ajar, completely empty. A handwritten note from Jessica. Just borrowing these for a quick business opportunity. My heart sank. Those weren't just any papers, they were $500,000 in protected government securities that legally can't be transferred or cashed by anyone but me. Before I dive into this nightmare, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button if you've ever trusted family with something important, and subscribe to hear more stories of betrayal and resilience. Trust me, what happened next will make your jaw drop. Growing up in a modest suburban home in Michigan wasn't always easy, especially after our father died when I was 12. Jessica was only 9 at the time, and we both watched as our mother worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. Despite the hardship, we had each other. Jessica looked up to me, and I felt responsible for protecting her as the older sister. I worked hard through high school, earned a scholarship to study finance at University of Michigan, and landed an internship at a prestigious financial advisory firm during my senior year. After graduating with honors, I climbed the corporate ladder steadily, making partner by the time I turned 35. My career path wasn't glamorous, but it was stable and rewarding. Meanwhile, Jessica took a different route. She dropped out of college after 2 years, trying her hand at various endeavors: fashion design, interior decorating, and most recently, an online boutique selling imported accessories. Nothing seemed to stick, and each failure left her more desperate for a big break. The government securities at the center of this nightmare came from our grandmother, Evelyn, who had worked for the Treasury Department for nearly 40 years. Upon her retirement, she had invested wisely in a special class of government securities available only to long-term federal employees. When she passed away 3 years ago, she left these securities to me with clear instructions to use them for retirement. These weren't ordinary bonds you could purchase at any bank. They were registered exclusively in my name with the Treasury Department, featuring special protections and restrictions. They couldn't be transferred to another person without extensive paperwork, fingerprinting, and approval from Treasury officials. More importantly, they couldn't be cashed by anyone except the registered owner, me. This was partly why I felt comfortable keeping them in my home safe rather than a safety deposit box. The papers themselves were worthless to anyone who might steal them. Or so I thought. I had tried helping Jessica financially over the years. When her boutique was struggling, I gave her a loan with a generous repayment plan. When she needed help with her mortgage, I covered 3 months of payments. I always believed in supporting family, but I also believed in teaching financial responsibility rather than enabling dependency. Jessica met Ryan Campbell 4 years ago at a charity event. He was charming, well-dressed, and talked about his real estate development business with such confidence. Something about him made me uneasy from the start, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Maybe it was the way his stories about successful deals always lacked specific details, or how he seemed to change the subject whenever I asked direct questions about his business. Within 6 months, they were married in a lavish ceremony that I later discovered they couldn't afford. Jessica became increasingly secretive about their finances after the wedding. Our weekly sister lunches dwindled to monthly, then quarterly. Family gatherings were often canceled at the last minute with vague excuses about Ryan's business obligations. Looking back, I should have recognized these as warning signs. But family relationships are complicated, and I wanted to respect her independence. I never imagined she would betray me in such a fundamental way. The last time I saw Jessica before the theft was at our mother's birthday dinner 2 months ago. She seemed distracted, checking her phone constantly. When I asked if everything was okay, she smiled too brightly and changed the subject. Ryan didn't attend, claiming he was closing an important deal in Chicago. Now I wonder if they were already planning to steal my securities that night. sizing up my vulnerability while pretending everything was normal. I returned home from a 3-day financial planning conference in Boston on a Tuesday evening. As I pulled into my driveway, nothing seemed amiss at first glance. My landscaping was pristine. Mail hadn't piled up thanks to my neighbor collecting it, and the house looked exactly as I'd left it. The first hint that something was wrong came when I checked my home security app. There had been unusual activity detected on Sunday afternoon motion alerts in my home office where I kept the safe. The system showed the alarm had been temporarily disarmed using a valid code, then reactivated hours later. Only 3 people had that code: me, my cleaning service, who never came on Sundays, and Jessica for emergencies. My stomach tightened as I rushed inside. Everything appeared normal in the living room and kitchen. Nothing seemed disturbed or out of place. Maybe I was overreacting. Then I entered my office. The first hint that something was wrong came when I checked my home security app. There had been unusual activity detected on Sunday afternoon motion alerts in my home office where I kept the safe. The system showed the alarm had been temporarily disarmed using a valid code, then reactivated hours later. Only 3 people had that code: me, my cleaning service, who never came on Sundays, and Jessica for emergencies. Empty. Completely empty. The manila envelope containing the government securities was gone. So were my passport, birth certificate, and the small amount of emergency cash I kept inside. In their place was a pale blue note card with Jessica's distinctive handwriting. "Morgan, I know this looks bad, but I promise I'm just borrowing these for a temporary business opportunity. Ryan found someone who can help us use them as collateral for a short-term loan. We'll have everything back to you within 2 weeks with enough profit to share. Please don't worry. Love you, Jess." My knees buckled and I sank to the floor, a wave of panic washing over me. Jessica didn't understand what she had taken. These weren't bearer bonds that anyone could cash. They were registered, protected government securities that could only be redeemed by me. Any attempt to use them fraudulently would trigger federal investigations. This wasn't just theft, it was potentially a federal crime that could send Jessica to prison. I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to spin as I fumbled for my phone and dialed Jessica's number. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. Next, I tried Ryan's number, though I had little hope he would answer. To my surprise, he picked up on the 4th ring. "Morgan. What's up?" His voice sounded casual, as if nothing was wrong. "Where's Jessica? Where are my securities?" My voice cracked with emotion. "Securities? What are you talking about?" His confusion sounded genuine, but I didn't trust it. "The government bonds in my safe. Jessica took them. She left a note saying it was your idea, some kind of business opportunity." A pause. "Too long, Morgan. I honestly have no idea what you're talking about. Jessica and I are going through a rough patch. She moved out 3 days ago. She didn't tell me where she was going. The government bonds in my safe. Jessica took them. She left a note saying it was your idea, some kind of business opportunity." I called the police next, but they were frustratingly unhelpful. Since Jessica had a valid access code and left a note implying she would return the items, they considered it a family matter rather than a clear theft. They suggested I try to contact her again before filing a formal report. Desperate for support, I called my best friend Allison Clark, who arrived 30 minutes later with takeout food I couldn't eat, and a rational perspective I desperately needed. "Walk me through exactly what was taken and why it matters so much," she said, clearing space at my kitchen table. Between sobs, I explained the nature of the securities, how they were registered solely in my name, how they represented my retirement security, how any attempt to cash or transfer them without proper authorization was a federal crime. "These aren't just papers worth money, Allison. They're traceable, protected government instruments. If Jessica and Ryan are trying to use these as collateral or sell them, they're committing fraud. They could go to prison." Allison's expression grew increasingly concerned as I explained. Have you considered that Jessica might not know what she's gotten involved with? You said Ryan found someone who could use them as collateral. What if she's being manipulated? What if she's in danger? That thought hadn't occurred to me. What if Jessica wasn't just a thief, but a victim herself? What if Ryan had coerced her into this scheme? Or worse, what if this mysterious someone was dangerous? My anger began mixing with worry. Whatever was happening, Jessica was in over her head, and I needed to find her before things got worse. By morning, I had barely slept but had formed a plan. The police weren't taking this seriously yet, so I would need to take matters into my own hands. My first call was to Keith Sullivan, a private investigator recommended by a colleague who had gone through a complicated divorce. He agreed to meet me at a coffee shop near my office at noon. My second call was to Dana Bennett, an attorney specializing in financial crimes. Her secretary initially said she was booked for weeks, but when I mentioned Treasury securities and possible federal fraud, Dana herself called back within an hour. Don't discuss this with anyone else, she advised. Meet me at my office at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Bring any documentation you have about the securities. With professionals enlisted, I decided to check Jessica and Ryan's apartment myself. They lived in a luxury high-rise downtown that I knew they couldn't afford on their legitimate income. The doorman recognized me from previous visits and seemed confused when I asked to be let up. Miss Reynolds, I thought you'd know. They moved out 3 days ago. Middle of the night. No forwarding address. My blood ran cold. This wasn't impulsive, it was planned. Did they take much with them? I asked. That's the strange thing. Just suitcases and small boxes. Left most of the furniture. Management's not happy. Back in my car, I called Keith Sullivan to update him, and he agreed to meet immediately. A former police detective with 20 years' experience, Keith had the weathered look of someone who had seen every type of human deception possible. First rule in cases like this, he said after listening to my story, follow the research trail. People research before they commit crimes. He was right. If Jessica and Ryan had planned this, they would have researched how to liquidate the securities. That afternoon, I used my emergency key to enter my mother's house while she was at her bridge club. Mom kept the family computer in her den, and Jessica often used it when visiting. I felt terrible invading my sister's privacy, but I was desperate for leads. The browser history revealed what I feared. Searches for how to sell government bonds, transferring Treasury securities, and most alarmingly, penalties for securities fraud. Jessica knew exactly what she was doing and the potential consequences. With this evidence, the police finally took my report seriously. Officer Martinez took detailed notes and promised to file the report immediately, giving me a case number to reference. That evening, I received an unexpected call from a blocked number. Miss Reynolds? This is Theodore Jenkins from the Treasury Department's Securities Investigation Unit. His deep voice was formal, authoritative. We've detected unusual activity related to your registered securities. I need to meet with you as soon as possible. We arranged to meet at my attorney's office the next morning. Jenkins was tall, African American, with military posture and the precise language of someone who had spent decades in government service. He explained that someone had attempted to verify the securities' authenticity through channels that triggered automatic alerts. These securities have special protections, Miss Reynolds. They're part of a program available only to career Treasury employees like your grandmother. Any attempt to transfer or cash them requires biometric verification from the registered owner. Where was the verification attempt made? I asked. Jenkins hesitated. I'm not at liberty to disclose all details of an ongoing investigation, but I can tell you it originated outside the United States. This is now a federal matter. The realization that Jessica and Ryan had fled the country with my securities hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just theft, it was international financial fraud. Later that day, I visited our mother at her assisted living facility. At 72, Margaret Reynolds remained sharp and independent despite her physical limitations from rheumatoid arthritis. I had been managing her finances since my father died, setting up automatic payments for her care from an account I regularly funded. Mom, I need to ask you something about Jessica. I began carefully after our usual catch-up conversation. Have you noticed anything unusual about her behavior lately? Mom's expression shifted subtly. What has she done now? The resignation in her voice suggested she already expected the worst. Later that day, I visited our mother at her assisted living facility. At 72, Margaret Reynolds remained sharp and independent despite her physical limitations from rheumatoid arthritis. I had been managing her finances since my father died, setting up automatic payments for her care from an account I regularly funded. Jessica has always been jealous of you, Morgan. Your stability, your success, even your relationship with your grandmother. But Mom, she stole $500,000 from me. I'm not excusing it, Mom said, though her tone suggested otherwise. But you've always had everything, Morgan. The good grades, the scholarships, the successful career. Jessica has struggled her whole life to find her place. Maybe if you had shared some of that inheritance instead of keeping it all. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own mother was partially blaming me for being robbed by my sister. Mom, Grandma left those securities to me because she knew I would be responsible with them. And I have helped Jessica. I've loaned her money for her business, helped with her mortgage, always making her feel like a charity case. Mom interrupted. Always the successful sister helping the failure. I left my mother's facility feeling completely alone. Not only had my sister betrayed me, but my mother seemed to think I deserved it. The family I thought I could always count on had crumbled beneath me. When I returned home, I found an envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside were bank statements. I immediately recognized the account I had set up for my mother's care expenses. Several withdrawals were highlighted, totaling over $30,000 in the past year, none of which I had authorized. Jessica hadn't just stolen my securities, she had been systematically draining our mother's care fund as well. 3 days after our first meeting, P.I. Keith Sullivan called with troubling news. I've been tracking Ryan Campbell's associates, he explained, and found connections to a man named Victor Caldwell. The name meant nothing to me. Caldwell has a history of investment scams targeting vulnerable populations, mainly seniors and widows. He was indicted twice, but the charges were dropped when witnesses mysteriously changed their testimonies. He specializes in convincing people to invest in guaranteed high-return opportunities that don't exist. Keith had uncovered photos of Ryan and Caldwell meeting at an upscale restaurant in Chicago 3 weeks before the theft. Jessica wasn't present in any of the photos. There's more, Keith continued. Ryan and Jessica purchased one-way tickets to Cancun the day after your securities disappeared. From there, they took a private charter to Mexico City, Mexico. That explained what happened next. Treasury Agent Jenkins called that afternoon. Miss Reynolds, we've identified an attempt to verify your securities at a financial institution in Mexico City. The verification failed because it requires biometric confirmation from you. But this suggests the perpetrators are trying to use them as collateral for a loan. Can you freeze the securities somehow? I asked. They're already frozen by nature of their registration, Jenkins explained. But now we've placed additional alerts across international financial networks. Any further attempts to use them will be immediately flagged. That evening, I returned home exhausted to find my front door slightly ajar. Heart pounding, I backed away and called the police from my car. Officers searched the house and found no intruders, but my home office had been thoroughly ransacked. The thieves weren't subtle drawers pulled out, files dumped on the floor, even books pulled from shelves. They were looking for something specific, Officer Martinez noted. Any idea what? I did. The original certificates for the securities were in my safe, but the supporting documentation, the inheritance papers, registration details, and contact information for the Treasury Department had been stored in my file cabinet. Someone wanted the complete paper trail. The following day brought another shocking revelation. Charles Winters, a family friend who worked at my bank, called me privately. Morgan, I need to tell you something. And I'm risking my job by doing so. Jessica came to see me about 2 months ago, asking about your accounts and investments. She specifically wanted to know about any physical assets you might keep at home. I thought she was planning a surprise for you, so I told her about a conversation we had years ago where you mentioned keeping important papers in a home safe. My hands trembled as I gripped the phone. Charles, those papers were worth $500,000. They've been stolen. His sharp intake of breath confirmed he hadn't known the consequences of his indiscretion. She manipulated me, Morgan. She said she was worried about you, that you'd been acting strange, making concerning financial decisions. She convinced me she was trying to protect you. Did Ryan put her up to this? I asked. Actually, Charles hesitated. Jessica claimed you had stolen their portion of your grandmother's inheritance. She said the securities were meant to be split between you both, but you had somehow managed to get everything. This was a complete fabrication. Grandmother's will had been crystal clear, witnessed by multiple people, but it revealed Jessica's mindset. She believed she was entitled to what I had. My next lead came from an unexpected source. While scrolling through social media that evening, I noticed Jessica's friend Bethany posting photos from a luxury resort in Bali. Bethany was a kindergarten teacher who had often complained about living paycheck to paycheck. How was she suddenly affording an international luxury vacation? I messaged another mutual friend who confirmed Bethany had received a generous loan from Jessica just before leaving on her trip, a loan that came with the stipulation that she not disclose it to anyone, especially me. When I managed to reach Bethany via video call, her expression shifted from surprise to fear when she saw it was me. I can't talk about Jessica, she said immediately. I promised, Bethany. She stole $500,000 from me. She's in serious trouble. If you know where she is, you need to tell me before things get worse. I don't know where she is. Bethany insisted, too quickly. She just helped me with a loan for this trip. That's all. With what money, Bethany? Jessica doesn't have that kind of cash. Bethany's eyes darted nervously. She said you've always hoarded the family money. That you controlled everything after your grandmother died and never gave her what was rightfully hers. That's not true, I said. But Bethany had already ended the call. Jessica wasn't just stealing from me, she was crafting a narrative that painted me as the villain, possibly to justify her actions to herself and others. How many people had she told these lies to? That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about my apartment felt wrong. Following an instinct, I checked behind the ventilation grate in my living room and found what I feared: a small wireless camera, recently installed. Someone was watching me. The discovery of the hidden camera changed everything. This wasn't just theft, it was surveillance, possibly leading to something more dangerous. I called Agent Jenkins and Keith Sullivan immediately, and both advised extreme caution. While waiting for them to arrive, my phone rang with an unknown number. Morgan Reynolds? The voice was male, unfamiliar, with a slight accent I couldn't place. Yes. Who's this? Someone who knows what you're doing. Stop looking for your sister. Stop the investigation. The securities are gone. Accept the loss, and move on with your life. My hand tightened around the phone. Who is this? Where's Jessica? Your sister made her choice. If you continue interfering, your next loss won't be financial. The line went dead. When Agent Jenkins arrived with 2 additional Treasury agents, I played back the recorded call. Their expressions grew grave. Miss Reynolds, we need to discuss your safety. This threat suggests organized criminal involvement beyond what we initially suspected. Jenkins recommended I relocate temporarily while they investigated the surveillance breach. I packed essential items and moved in with Allison that same day. Allison's suburban home offered anonymity and security. Her brother Brian, an ex-Army Ranger who now worked in corporate security, offered additional protection and installed temporary security measures around the property. These people aren't amateurs, Brian observed after examining the camera from my apartment. This is professional-grade surveillance equipment, not something you'd buy online. 2 days later, the threat escalated dramatically. Driving to a meeting with Dana Bennett, my attorney, I noticed a black SUV following unusually close behind me on the highway. When I changed lanes, it matched my movements. As I approached an intersection, the SUV accelerated suddenly, bumping my rear bumper as the light turned yellow. I swerved, barely maintaining control as I drove through the intersection. The SUV vanished in traffic, but the message was clear. This was a warning. When mechanics inspected my car later, they discovered evidence of tampering with the brake lines. If I had needed to stop suddenly at high speed, the brakes would have failed completely. This wasn't intimidation anymore, it was attempted murder. These people aren't amateurs, Brian observed after examining the camera from my apartment. This is professional-grade surveillance equipment, not something you'd buy online. I swerved, barely maintaining control as I drove through the intersection. The SUV vanished in traffic, but the message was clear. This was a warning, setting a trap. I mentioned to Diane that I would be meeting Treasury agents at a specific restaurant that evening. Instead, I went to a different location and watched the original restaurant from across the street. Sure enough, Ryan Campbell appeared, scanning the patio seating before making a phone call and leaving angrily. The next morning, I confronted Diane in my office with Keith Sullivan present. "How long have you been feeding information to Ryan?" I asked directly. Diane's face crumpled. At first, she tried to deny everything, but when I mentioned the restaurant, she broke down completely. "He approached me 6 months ago," she sobbed. "He knew I was behind on my mortgage after my divorce. He offered to help if I just kept him informed about your schedule and business dealings." "Did you know they were planning to steal from me?" I demanded. "No, I swear." Diane looked genuinely shocked. "Ryan just said they needed to know when you'd be traveling for business. He never mentioned stealing anything." As Diane's story unfolded, a more disturbing picture emerged. Ryan and Jessica weren't working alone. They were connected to Lawrence Harrington, a wealthy businessman I had never met but whose investment fund I had analyzed 3 years earlier while working with federal regulators. My analysis had helped expose fraudulent practices that resulted in heavy fines, though Harrington himself had escaped criminal charges. "Harrington hired Ryan specifically to get close to your family," Diane explained through tears. "Jessica was just the means to reach you. This whole thing, it's about revenge for what you did to Harrington's business." This revelation stunned me. Jessica wasn't just a thief. She was potentially a pawn in someone else's revenge scheme. Was she even aware of who she was really working for? The weight of these revelations, combined with the ongoing threats, nearly broke me. That night, alone in Allison's guest room, I seriously considered giving up. I could move away, change my name, start over somewhere else. The securities were ensured I could eventually recover financially. Was justice worth risking my life? As I contemplated surrender, my phone chimed with an alert from my mother's assisted living facility. Her regular evening medication check had revealed dangerously low blood pressure. She had been taken to the hospital as a precaution. At the hospital, doctors discovered unusual levels of medication in my mother's system, amounts inconsistent with her prescription. Someone had been tampering with her pills. The message was clear. No one I cared about was safe until this was over. With my mother now at risk, surrender was no longer an option. Brian helped me move her from the hospital to a secure medical facility under an assumed name, telling staff we were concerned about potential elder abuse from a family member. It wasn't far from the truth. Meanwhile, Agent Jenkins informed me that Treasury Department investigations had expanded considerably. "Miss Reynolds, your securities appear to be part of a much larger financial crime network. We've identified similar attempts with other protected government instruments across 3 states. The FBI has joined our investigation." That afternoon, I met FBI agent Cassandra Reynolds, no relation, at a secure location. With her cropped silver hair and piercing blue eyes, Agent Reynolds had the direct manner of someone who had spent decades hunting financial criminals. We believe Harrington is using stolen securities as collateral for loans that fund other criminal enterprises, she explained. He specifically targets instruments with strong government backing because financial institutions are more willing to issue loans against them, even with incomplete documentation. But these securities can't be transferred without my biometric verification, I pointed out. True, but many foreign banks don't understand the intricacies of U.S. Treasury instruments. With convincing forgeries of supporting documents, criminals can sometimes secure short-term loans before verification processes are completed. As we discussed the case, I began formulating a plan that made use of my financial expertise. If Harrington wanted my securities so badly, perhaps we could use that desire against him. What if we created documentation suggesting additional securities exist? I proposed. We could leak information about a second set of even more valuable bonds that I supposedly keep in a different location. Agent Reynolds raised an eyebrow, impressed. Set a trap. I like it. While the FBI began creating convincing forgeries for our trap, PI Keith Sullivan discovered something alarming. His office had been broken into, with only my case files targeted. The next day, Keith himself noticed a car following him. These criminals were becoming increasingly bold and desperate. My trap required convincing bait. Working with Treasury experts, we created documentation for fictional Series I savings bonds worth $750,000 more tempting than what had already been stolen. Agent Reynolds arranged for rumors about these bonds to reach Harrington through carefully monitored channels. As this plan unfolded, I received a call from Walter Jenkins, the family lawyer who had handled my grandmother's estate. His voice sounded strained, unnatural. Morgan, I need to see you immediately about your grandmother's will. There's been a complication. Something felt wrong. Walter had never mentioned complications before, and the timing was too convenient. With Agent Reynolds' approval, I agreed to meet Walter at his office with FBI agents monitoring from nearby locations. Walter looked haggard, with dark circles under his eyes and a slight tremble in his hands as he pulled documents from his safe. Your sister visited me before she disappeared, he began, avoiding my eyes. She made some accusations about the handling of your grandmother's estate. What kind of accusations? Walter placed a document before me, a copy of my grandmother's will that looked similar to the one I had but with crucial differences. In this version, the securities were to be divided equally between Jessica and me. This is a forgery, I said immediately. Jessica claims it's the original. Walter continued, still not meeting my gaze. She says you somehow managed to have the will altered after your grandmother's death. That's absurd. There were multiple witnesses, including you. Walter's shoulders slumped. Morgan, I need to confess something. The will was altered, but not by you. I did it. Under pressure from your grandmother. I stared at him in shock as he continued. Evelyn came to me a week before she died. She was concerned about Jessica's relationship with Ryan. She had met him once and didn't trust him. She feared he was only interested in Jessica for potential inheritance money. She asked me to change the will to leave everything to you, trusting you would help Jessica when appropriate. So the original will did include Jessica. My voice was barely a whisper. Walter nodded miserably. The securities were to be split evenly. I committed fraud by altering the will, and Jessica somehow found out. This revelation shook me deeply. Had I unknowingly benefited from fraud? Was Jessica's sense of betrayal justified? Why are you telling me this now, Walter? His eyes darted nervously to the door. They contacted me, threatened my family, said I needed to get you to sign a document admitting you knew about the altered will. They're planning to use it to legitimize their possession of the securities. The FBI agents listening outside had heard enough. They entered, taking Walter into protective custody and ensuring his family's safety. While his actions had been illegal, his confession had given us valuable insight into Harrington's strategy. That night, I couldn't sleep. Was I partially responsible for what happened? Had Jessica's resentment been building for years because of an inheritance that should have been partly hers? I needed answers about my grandmother's true intentions. The next morning, I visited my mother's storage unit where we had kept many of grandmother Evelyn's personal effects. Among her papers, I found a series of private letters she had written to me but never sent, dated from the last months of her life. In them, she expressed her concerns about Jessica's relationship with Ryan, whom she had met only once but immediately distrusted. She worried Jessica was being manipulated and would squander her inheritance under Ryan's influence. The final letter contained a crucial passage. I've asked Walter to change my will temporarily. The securities will go entirely to you, Morgan. But I trust you to share them with Jessica when the time is right, when she's free of Ryan's influence and ready to make her own decisions. You've always protected your sister. I'm asking you to protect her from herself this time. My grandmother had intended for me to eventually share the inheritance. She had expected me to recognize when Jessica was ready for that responsibility. Had I failed her by keeping everything for myself? Had I driven Jessica to desperate measures by not seeing what my grandmother had seen? As I wrestled with these moral questions, my phone pinged with a text message from an unknown number. I need to see you. Alone. No police. I'm in trouble. Jay. After months of searching, Jessica was finally reaching out. But was it really her, or another trap? Jessica's message contained coordinates for a meeting at a crowded shopping mall food court, public enough to be relatively safe, but busy enough to make surveillance difficult. Agent Reynolds strongly advised against going. This has all the hallmarks of a setup, she warned. If it is your sister, they're likely using her as bait. But what if she's reaching out for help? I countered. What if she's realized she's in over her head? After intense debate, we compromised. I would meet Jessica wearing a concealed recording device. FBI agents would monitor from a distance, and Brian would pose as a shopper nearby. If anything seemed suspicious, I had a code phrase to trigger immediate intervention. The mall buzzed with Saturday afternoon shoppers as I settled at a table with clear sightlines to all entrances. 10 minutes past our meeting time, I spotted her, Jessica, my little sister, looking nothing like the confident woman I remembered. Her normally styled hair hung limp around a gaunt face. She had lost weight, and dark circles shadowed her eyes as she nervously scanned the food court. When she saw me, a complex mix of emotions crossed her face: relief, shame, fear. Morgan. She slid into the chair opposite me. Thank you for coming. Where are the securities, Jessica? I kept my voice even, fighting conflicting urges to hug her and shake her. She glanced around nervously. I can't just give them back. It's complicated. Try me. Ryan got involved with some dangerous people. He owed them money, and they threatened him, threatened us. When he found out about your securities, he saw it as our only way out. So you stole from me instead of asking for help? The hurt in my voice was genuine. You wouldn't have understood. Jessica's eyes flashed with a familiar defiance. You've always had everything together. Your perfect job, your perfect life. You have no idea what it's like to be drowning. I would have helped you, Jess. I've always helped you. Like a charity case, she snapped. Always the superior older sister bailing out the failure. The conversation was following exactly the pattern our mother had described. Jessica's resentment had deep roots. I changed tactics. Is Ryan forcing you to do this? Are you in danger? Something shifted in Jessica's expression. Ryan loves me. He's trying to protect me. By involving you in federal crimes? Jessica, these people you're working with, they're dangerous. They've been threatening me, tampering with my car. They even messed with Mom's medication. Genuine shock registered on her face. What? No. That can't be right. They promised no one would get hurt. Who promised? Harrington? Jessica flinched at the name, confirming my suspicions. How do you know about him? I know everything, Jess. I know Harrington hired Ryan to get close to you to get to me. I know this is about revenge for an investment fraud case I helped expose. That's not. Jessica stopped, doubt clouding her features. Ryan wouldn't use me like that. Has he told you where the money from these securities is going? Because it's not going to pay off his debts. It's funding Harrington's criminal enterprises. Jessica's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. As she lifted it, I noticed something troubling. She was positioning it oddly, as if deliberately keeping it between us. Remembering Brian's security briefing, I recognized the movement. She was attempting to drop something into my drink. I pretended not to notice, continuing to talk while subtly moving my glass aside. Jessica, whatever they have on you, whatever they're threatening you with, we can fix it together. You're my sister. I will always protect you. Tears welled in her eyes, but her hand still hovered near my glass. She was conflicted but still following through with whatever plan had been set. It's too late, she whispered. I've made too many mistakes. It's never too late for the truth, I insisted, deliberately taking a fake sip from my water. We can. I allowed my speech to slur slightly. We can figure this out. Jessica watched intently as I slumped in my chair, pretending to be affected by whatever she had attempted to drug me with. Her expression showed both relief and profound sadness. I'm so sorry, Morgan, she said, rising to support me. They're watching us. Just come with me now. I'll explain everything once we're somewhere safe. She helped me to my feet, leading me toward the service corridors. Through half-closed eyes, I saw Brian tensing nearby, ready to intervene. Jessica guided me toward the exit where a black van waited, its engine running. As we approached the van, I pressed the panic button in my pocket and shoved away from Jessica, dropping the act entirely. Federal agents. Freeze. Agent Reynolds' voice boomed across the parking garage as FBI personnel swarmed the area. The van driver attempted to flee but was blocked by strategically positioned vehicles. Ryan emerged from the passenger side, eyes wide with panic as agents surrounded him. He tried to run but was quickly tackled and handcuffed. Jessica stood frozen between us, looking from me to Ryan, the full weight of her situation crashing down on her. When agents approached to arrest her, she didn't resist. As they placed her in a separate vehicle from Ryan, I caught a final glimpse of my sister's face. The mask of resentment had fallen away, replaced by the devastated expression of someone who finally understood how thoroughly she had been manipulated. In the FBI debriefing room, Jessica broke down completely. Ryan had convinced her that stealing the securities was their only escape from crushing debt. He had carefully nurtured her resentment toward me, exploiting the insecurities that had always existed beneath our relationship. He told me Harrington was just a businessman who could help us cash the securities abroad. She sobbed. I didn't know about any criminal network. I didn't know they were threatening you. The FBI confirmed that Jessica had indeed been manipulated, though not entirely innocent. She had known she was committing theft but believed it was a victimless crime since I was wealthy enough not to miss it. She had genuinely not known about the surveillance or threats. The drug wasn't meant to harm you, she explained. Just make you compliant enough to get you to Harrington. He wanted to force you to sign transfer documents for the securities. They needed your biometric verification. As Jessica's full confession unfolded, I experienced a confusing mixture of vindication, heartbreak, and lingering anger. My sister had betrayed me, but she had also been betrayed by the man she loved. Agent Reynolds informed me that Jessica would likely face reduced charges in exchange for her testimony against Ryan and Harrington. She would still serve time, but with the possibility of rebuilding her life afterward. As they led Jessica away to formal processing, she looked back at me one last time. I really am sorry, Morgan. For everything. I couldn't yet bring myself to forgive her. But I nodded, acknowledging her apology. Whatever happened next, the sister I thought I knew was gone forever. A week passed with Jessica in federal custody and Ryan denied bail due to flight risk. The Treasury Department had recovered most of the securities before they could be used for loans, though some documentation remained missing. The FBI's investigation into Harrington's network expanded daily, with new connections to other financial crimes uncovered. I had begun the slow process of returning to normal life, though normal now included regular security sweeps of my apartment and maintaining unpredictable routines. I was staying with Allison until my place was deemed completely secure. The call came on Thursday afternoon, a number I didn't recognize, Morgan Reynolds. A male voice I immediately identified as Ryan's. "How did you get phone privileges?" I demanded, signaling to Allison to alert Agent Reynolds. "Special circumstances," he replied smoothly. "I have a proposal for you. A way to get your precious securities back completely intact. The Treasury Department has already recovered most of them." A week passed with Jessica in federal custody and Ryan denied bail due to flight risk. The Treasury Department had recovered most of the securities before they could be used for loans, though some documentation remained missing. The FBI's investigation into Harrington's network expanded daily, with new connections to other financial crimes uncovered. Despite my contempt for Ryan, I was intrigued. "What's your proposal?" A week passed with Jessica in federal custody and Ryan denied bail due to flight risk. The Treasury Department had recovered most of the securities before they could be used for loans, though some documentation remained missing. The FBI's investigation into Harrington's network expanded daily, with new connections to other financial crimes uncovered. "Why would you do that for her? You used her." A pause. "Not everything was a lie, Morgan. I do care about her, in my way." Against every recommendation from law enforcement, I agreed to meet Ryan under controlled conditions at the Federal Detention Center. Agent Reynolds insisted on being present, along with Ryan's attorney. Ryan looked diminished in his orange jumpsuit, his usual confidence replaced by a calculating wariness. His lawyer, an expensive-looking man in a tailored suit, clearly disapproved of this meeting. "Thank you for coming," Ryan began formally. "I understand your hatred for me." "You don't understand anything about me," I replied coldly. "What do you want?" "Jessica doesn't deserve to pay for my mistakes." He leaned forward. "The remaining securities and documentation are in a storage unit in Jessica's name. I'll give you the location and access code in exchange for your statement that she was manipulated and unaware of the full plan." "Why should I believe anything you say?" "Because Harrington is still out there," Ryan said, lowering his voice. "He's angry that the plan failed. The only leverage I have left is the location of those documents. If I give that to you, I have nothing to negotiate with him." "You expect me to believe you care more about Jessica's welfare than your own?" Ryan's eyes fixed on mine. "You and Jessica grew up in the same house but lived in different worlds. Did you know she defended you constantly in high school when people called you a stuck-up know-it-all? Did you know she turned down a scholarship to stay close to home and help with your mother after your father died?" These revelations caught me off guard. Jessica had never mentioned any of this. "Your problem, Morgan, is that you only see what confirms your narrative. The responsible older sister and the reckless younger one. You never looked deeper." His words stung because they contained a grain of truth. Had I been so fixed in my perception of our roles that I'd missed important aspects of Jessica's life? Agent Reynolds interrupted. "Mr. Campbell, the securities. Where are they?" Ryan provided the storage facility address and access code. Unit 217. "The documents are in a waterproof case behind the air vent." As we prepared to leave, Ryan added, "One more thing you should know. This was never just about money. Harrington has a personal vendetta against your family. Your grandmother was the Treasury investigator who helped build the case that sent his father to prison 20 years ago. The securities were just a bonus. The real goal was making you suffer." This revelation added another layer to the already complex case. Agent Reynolds dispatched agents to the storage facility immediately while we continued to question Ryan about Harrington's whereabouts. "He has a property outside the city. Remote. Private. That's where he wanted to take you after Jessica drugged you." With this new information, the FBI organized a raid on Harrington's compound. I wasn't permitted to accompany them, but Agent Reynolds kept me updated. The operation began at dawn, with tactical teams surrounding the isolated estate. Harrington had been tipped off somehow. As federal agents breached the perimeter, he and several associates attempted to flee in helicopters from a private landing pad. In the ensuing chaos, Harrington's helicopter suffered a mechanical failure during takeoff and crashed into a wooded area. By the time agents reached the crash site, Harrington had escaped on foot, though injured according to blood trails. 2 of his associates were captured, and a third had died in the crash. Ryan, upon hearing that Harrington had escaped, became visibly terrified. He'll think I betrayed him. No jail cell will be enough protection. His fear proved justified. 3 days later, while being transported to a court hearing, the convoy carrying Ryan was attacked. In the confusion, Ryan attempted to escape, suffering a gunshot wound to the leg. Whether the attack was orchestrated by Harrington or simply an opportunity Ryan tried to exploit remained unclear. I visited Ryan in the prison hospital ward, driven by a need for closure rather than compassion. Pale and handcuffed to his bed, he looked surprised to see me. "Your grandmother," he said without preamble. She saw through me immediately. What? The one time she met me, at that Christmas dinner. She took me aside afterward and said, "I know men like you. Stay away from my granddaughters." She knew exactly what I was. That's why she changed her will. How did you know about the will change? A bitter smile crossed his face. Harrington had been watching your family for years, waiting for the right moment. When your grandmother died, he had someone in the probate court who provided copies of the original documents. That's how we knew the will had been altered. So you used that to turn Jessica against me. It was easy. She already believed she deserved more. I just provided evidence that seemed to confirm her suspicions. Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his bed. For what it's worth, I didn't know Harrington planned to harm your mother. That crossed a line even for me. As I stood to leave, Ryan added, "Harrington won't stop, you know. He has the resources to disappear and rebuild. And he blames you for everything now." His warning stayed with me as I left the hospital. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but true safety would only come with Harrington's capture. 2 days later, agents found Harrington attempting to cross the Canadian border with a false passport. His injuries from the helicopter crash had slowed him down enough for border agents to recognize discrepancies in his documentation. With his arrest, the final piece of the conspiracy was in custody. The FBI raid on Harrington's compound yielded evidence connecting him to numerous financial crimes across multiple states. What had begun as an investigation into my stolen securities had expanded into one of the largest financial fraud cases in recent history. Agent Reynolds called with the news. "We got him, Morgan. Harrington is in custody. And the evidence we've gathered should put him away for decades." For the first time in months, I felt the tight knot of fear in my chest begin to loosen. My securities were being restored, the conspirators were in custody, and my mother was safe. But the deepest wound, Jessica's betrayal, remained unhealed. 6 months after Harrington's arrest, I sat in a federal courthouse, preparing to testify in the conspiracy case against him. The prosecution had built a comprehensive case, but my testimony about the original theft that triggered the investigation was still crucial. Jessica had already accepted a plea deal in exchange for her testimony against Ryan and Harrington. She received a reduced sentence of 3 years, with eligibility for parole after 18 months. Ryan faced a minimum of 15 years for his role in the conspiracy, with additional charges pending in other jurisdictions. After my testimony, which took the better part of a day, I found myself face to face with Harrington in the courthouse hallway as he was being led back to holding. In his expensive suit, he looked more like a CEO than a criminal mastermind, except for the handcuffs and the cold hatred in his eyes when he saw me. "This isn't over," he said quietly as marshals guided him past. Some debts span generations. His threat might have terrified me months earlier, But now I simply watched him go, unmoved. I had faced the worst and survived. His words could no longer reach me. I had begun visiting Jessica once a month at the minimum security facility where she was serving her sentence. Our first meeting had been painfully awkward, with Jessica alternating between tearful apologies and defensive justifications. Over time, our conversations had become more honest, peeling back layers of resentment and misunderstanding that had been building for years. "I was always jealous of how easy everything seemed for you," Jessica admitted during one visit. "I felt like I was constantly struggling while you sailed through life." "Nothing was easy," I corrected her. "I just didn't share my struggles. I was trying to be strong for you and Mom after Dad died, and I resented you for it," Jessica acknowledged. "For being the perfect daughter while I was the mess up." These conversations were difficult but necessary. With the help of Dr. Martinez, a therapist specializing in family trauma, I was slowly working through the complex emotions surrounding Jessica's betrayal: anger, hurt, guilt, and a persistent sense of failure for not having recognized her vulnerability to manipulation. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing," Dr. Martinez reminded me. "It means releasing yourself from the burden of anger and resentment so you can move forward." Moving forward also meant rebuilding my relationship with our mother. After her initial defense of Jessica, we had experienced a painful rift. When she was finally well enough for a serious conversation, I showed her grandmother Evelyn's letters explaining the will change. "I didn't know," Mom said softly, tears in her eyes. "I just always felt I needed to defend Jessica because you were so capable of taking care of yourself." "Being capable doesn't mean I didn't need support too," I replied, years of unspoken hurt in my voice. This simple exchange opened the door to more honest communication. For perhaps the first time, Mom began to see me not just as the strong, responsible daughter, but as a person with my own vulnerabilities and needs. Treasury Agent Jenkins remained involved in my case long after the immediate threat had passed, helping me navigate the complex process of fully restoring my securities. What might have taken years was expedited through his expertise and connections within the department. "Your grandmother was highly respected in the Treasury," he explained during our final meeting. "Many of us still remember her. Helping you recover what she left you feels like honoring her legacy." As my professional and financial life stabilized, my personal support network remained crucial to my emotional recovery. Allison and Brian had become even closer friends through the ordeal. When Brian proposed opening a security consulting firm specializing in financial crimes prevention, I invested some of my recovered funds as a silent partner. The experience had changed my professional focus as well. I began specializing in helping victims of financial fraud, particularly cases involving family betrayal. The emotional complexity of these situations required more than just financial expertise. It needed someone who truly understood the personal devastation such betrayals caused. 6 months after Harrington's conviction, I established the Reynolds Financial Security Foundation, using a portion of my recovered securities to fund education and support for victims of sophisticated financial crimes. The foundation particularly focused on elderly victims and those exploited by family members, people whose financial security and trust had been simultaneously violated. The foundation's first community dinner brought together survivors of financial fraud to share their stories and resources. My mother attended, proudly helping to welcome guests. She had become one of my strongest supporters, volunteering with the foundation and sharing her own experience of nearly being caught in the crossfire of financial manipulation. As the event wound down, Mom pulled me aside. "Jessica's parole hearing is next month." She asked if we would both attend. The request caught me off guard. Though our monthly visits had become more comfortable, the idea of actively supporting Jessica's early release stirred complicated emotions. "I'll think about it," I promised, neither committing nor refusing. Later that week, I visited Jessica and found her noticeably changed. The prison's financial literacy program had given her skills she'd never developed before. She was helping other inmates understand basic financial management and preparing for a certification exam she could complete while incarcerated. "I want to make actual amends when I get out," she explained, a new determination in her voice. "Not just say sorry, but do something meaningful to repair the damage." "What are you thinking?" I asked, cautiously optimistic about this new direction. "I want to work with your foundation, sharing my story as a warning to others. Not as the victim, as the perpetrator who got manipulated but still made terrible choices." She met my eyes directly. "I want people to understand how easy it is to justify hurting others when you feel entitled to what they have." Her self-awareness surprised me. This wasn't the jealous, defensive sister I'd known. The experience had broken something in Jessica, but perhaps it had also created space for something healthier to grow. "What are you thinking?" I asked, cautiously optimistic about this new direction. Halfway through dinner, Jessica set down her fork and addressed the elephant in the room. "I want to work with your foundation, sharing my story as a warning to others. Not as the victim, as the perpetrator who got manipulated but still made terrible choices." She met my eyes directly. "I want people to understand how easy it is to justify hurting others when you feel entitled to what they have." Mom reached across the table to squeeze Jessica's hand, but I remained silent, letting her continue. Halfway through dinner, Jessica set down her fork and addressed the elephant in the room. The following month brought our family's first dinner together since the crisis began. Mom hosted at her assisted living facility's private dining room. Jessica, granted a supervised day release for the occasion, arrived in civilian clothes, looking nervous but composed. The conversation was initially stiff and polite, carefully avoiding sensitive topics. The dinner ended with tentative plans for future family gatherings. It wasn't a magical reconciliation, but it was an honest beginning. Some wounds would take years to fully heal, and our family would never return to what it had been before. But perhaps we could build something new, something based on truth rather than comfortable illusions. "I need to say something to both of you," she began, voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. "I'm sorry for what I put this family through. Not just the theft and the legal consequences, but the lies I told myself and others about both of you. Mom, I manipulated your love and concern for me. Morgan, I twisted your success into something to resent rather than celebrate." A gentle breeze stirred the cemetery trees, sending dappled sunlight across the grave. "But I understand why you didn't. Some lessons we have to learn by living through them." I placed the flowers and stepped back, reflecting on everything that had happened since that terrible day I found my safe empty. I had lost my sense of security, been betrayed by family, faced genuine danger, and discovered strengths I never knew I possessed. "You saw it all coming, didn't you?" I said softly to the granite marker. The danger in Ryan, the weakness in Jessica, the responsibilities I'd face. "I wish you'd trusted me enough to tell me directly. Some bonds, I had learned, can break under pressure. But others, the ones truly worth keeping, could be reforged stronger than before. The securities were just papers, valuable, yes, but ultimately replaceable. The sense of safety within my own family had been the true treasure, and its loss had been the greatest theft of all. Yet even that was gradually being restored, not to its original form but to something more honest, more resilient,